The presentation, as you can see, is Train the Pathways Teachers. The event format for today is really about the Pathways Learning Center concept revealed. Ooh, that sounds a little interesting. We're going to bring about that concept throughout the presentation, offering some introductory comments about that. We're going to then answer some questions that came in advance. We just have one. And the meat of this presentation really is going to be interactive with all of you. I know a few of us are still filtering in. The folks here together are actually going to help form the curriculum, in fact. As mentioned, it's going to be through breakout rooms, main room collaboration. And at the end, we'll do just sort of a general open question and answer period. So what do we mean by revealed? We're going to be discovering this together. Who is this webinar for? Specifically for area directors, division directors, and all current, incoming, and past club officers and leaders. And I suspect everybody here is one of those. You've either been a club officer or are a club officer, or just generally have a leadership role within your club. And I'd like to just take a moment and recognize each of you for being here. You've taken your valuable time to spend with us and hopefully learn something for yourselves, but can contribute to fellow Toastmasters. So if you would like to just give yourselves a hand, and I'm going to do the same, I very much appreciate you all being here. It really cannot happen without you. Your experience level teaching pathways, just to make sure you know you're in the right place. First of all, if you're sort of beginning, believe it or not, you're actually in the right place. This is an open environment in this regard. It's for intermediate folks as well. And then finally, even if you're at the advanced level, I think you're going to find value from today. How will we learn and discover? What's going to unify all these levels, all these roles? It's in fact the three guiding principles that have guided the curriculum in the Pathways Learning Center this year. It's going to be actually revealed through answering targeted questions where you actually are going to be providing much of the content, but I will give some sort of recapping to sort of define further and application material. I would like to start with the question that was submitted in advance. I always like to honor that preparatory work ahead of time, and right now is no exception on that. So the question that came in, and if the questioner is here, please feel free to raise your hand, and Lori, maybe you can just keep an eye out for that in the chat, but the wording was, so how does all this work, or something like that? But I interpreted that question to be, how does the District 7 Pathways Learning Center and general pathways teaching work? Is the questioner here, or shall I just answer it more generally? Any hands raised, Lori?
Not at this time, Dave.
Okay, well, they're either going to be here or we'll be watching the video later. So I do want to honor that question that came in. Really, it's how does this whole Pathways Learning Center thing work in terms of pathways teaching? I'm just going to give you a really high-level overview. The way we get to the Pathways Learning Center is we go to the District 7 Toastmasters webpage. It's just d7toastmasters.org. And we go to the Pathways menu and then use the down arrow to get to Pathways Learning Center. Now, of course, this does have its own URL address, but this is one way to do it if you've been to our district website before. So we click on that, and again, it will bring you to the individual page. And I'd like to just bring to your attention really three different areas. So first of all, the way that the page is set up, it's top to bottom, beginning, intermediate, and then intermediate/advanced all the way through to represent each of those levels. The first level here for the questioner that asks, how does this whole thing work, is the beginning pathways resources section. This is pretty much at the top of the page, and we denoted it in red so it could really stand out. And this is where you're going to see a lot of your beginning material. The way that this works is the Pathways Learning Center at District 7 is intended to be a one-stop education resource. And here is that PDF that Lori had mentioned in my introduction, Toastmasters Level 1, start to finish for new members. There's a lot of information there that you would need from the beginning. And it's my contention that there's really not a lot beyond what in fact is in this section that you would need as a beginner. The second aspect, intermediate, shall we say, might be represented by any vice president education, club officers, or those that are helping their clubs as a base camp manager or want to help other base camp managers, is in this intermediate section. And this video is something that I think would be beneficial for you. Base camp manager, basic level, see the video below, which there is a video. And the reason we titled it Base Camp Managers, VPE, President, Secretary, because believe it or not, a lot of folks don't know that all three of those club officers are always base camp managers. And it's my contention that the basics that would be needed at the beginning level are all in this 14.5-minute video. Bottom line is maybe you're not even an online type of individual. There's really only 3 online tasks that are needed as a base camp manager. The first one is the ability to process pending requests. Secondly, the ability to process awards, remembering that they need to be processed both in base camp and Club Central. And then third is how to access your club roster, which can be done through the Toastmasters International website. If you have questions on that, please ask me, but I wanted to let you know there's really only 3 things you need to do at the basic level for that. So that's the intermediate level. And then finally, the more advanced, intermediate/advanced, I would say is represented by our intermediate/advanced tools and reference materials. Quite a bit of time was spent selecting the absolutely necessary PDFs and helping tools. This is our best that we can do at collating the best in the world that's out there. So a lot of time is spent. I hope you find that valuable. So the questioner is not here, so I can't ask for any follow-up, but I hope that that provides some perspective on how does this whole thing work. To recap, it's sort of how the Pathways Learning Center webpage works in relation to Pathways teaching. Any questions or follow-up on that, or shall we proceed on? Don't see any questions. Excellent. Great. Okay, we're going to get started with the breakout rooms. And I must admit, we got a little bit more numbers in terms of who registered, so I'm going to decrease the amount of breakout rooms. I don't want it to be awkward, so I'm just going to do 2 breakout rooms rather than 3. I think would be a great way to do this. So I will set that up as we get there. The first question, and Lori, I see something came in the chat. Please let me know if there's anything I need. The breakout rooms were going to be set up for 3.5 minutes for each question. What I would like you to do, because we're going to use the same folks for each question, is perhaps choose a different representative to share with the group. Now, when we do have larger numbers, we generally cannot get to every group, but we choose 1 or 2 per question. Because we have a more intimate size tonight, we might actually be able to get at least a response from each group if we just have 2. And then we'll come back to the main room for collaboration. The first question is for all of you. Have you encountered motivation issues when teaching Pathways to members? Secondly, how did or could you solve this issue? I'm going to repeat those again. The first question is, have you encountered motivation issues? In other words, you're talking with someone about pathways and they maybe have resistance or things like that. Have you encountered that? Maybe it's even resistance within yourself. That's why I left it a little bit more open-ended. And how did or could you solve this issue? The breakout rooms are going to be for 3.5 minutes. You will be brought back automatically. We're going to go right now. And again, because we do have a more intimate size, I'm going to go ahead and change the number of breakout rooms. And we are all set. Any questions before we go? Or are we racing forward, diving in head first into the pool? We're good to go. Here we go. Okay, welcome back. Great. So who would like to help with these questions? Again, just to reiterate, the question being, have you encountered motivation issues when teaching pathways to members? And secondly, how did or could you solve the issue? And I wonder, Lori, who is volunteering that would like to jump in first? And I think, Madam Chatmaster, you might be muted.
Thank you. We didn't actually discuss that. We started talking about the question.
Yes.
If anyone wants to raise their hand from my group and volunteer that they'd like to share or be the promoter of our group, they can do that.
Great, we'll stand by and.
Or I can go ahead and recap what Dr. Gwen and Cherise had to say.
Sure.
Cherise was excited as a brand new Toastmaster. She logged on right away. She enjoyed taking the assessment and is now doing pathways with her on her journey. So she hasn't had any difficulty. She enjoys enjoying what she's doing. She's brand new and she's here to learn.
Wow, that's great. You know, I had not anticipated that precise way of answering, meaning you can have motivation issues, but why can't it be positive as well as, you know, having challenges? So we'll take that any day of the week. Thank you.
And Dr. Gwen just feels like maybe people just don't know what they don't know. So if there's things that they need to learn, they're not sure which kind of questions to ask. And she's just found that just going through your Pathways Learning Center is just wonderful. And she recommends it. So along with myself.
That's great. And maybe that could give a person more confidence if they're struggling with their motivation by doing that. Yeah, I like that.
Back to you, Mr. Presenter.
Great, excellent. Big hand for Lori. Thank you, Lori. Regarding the other group, I don't think we've heard from the other group yet. Is there any volunteer participation opportunity coming in there, or?
In the second group, it was Renee Taylor, Stephanie, Stephen, Stefan, and myself.
Yes.
We were a little sarcastic when asked about the motivational issues, and we all agree, yes, they exist.
Yes.
How did we resolve it? Each of us had a different method. Renee did a lot of hand holding and walking people through pathways. I talked about how the DTMs didn't want to do pathways and eventually went to pathways because how do you mentor the new members coming in if you don't understand pathways? And Stephanie liked both of our stories.
That is excellent. So if I can receive that, the way to sort of solve some of these issues for the beginners maybe was a little bit more, hand holding. And secondly, for the DTMs that have been doing this for a long time, that we're experiencing that, like, should I do it? Should I not do it? It was the opportunity to mentor others. And I think that's a great motivation commentary. Excellent. Thank you. Big hand for Ellen, our Zoom master for today as well. Thank you. and for all the participants. The other thing I wanted to add to the excellent commentary is just more generally to listen to someone that is experiencing motivation issues and wait to give the solutions until they in fact ask. Another thing that many of us have tried to do is someone says, well, you know, this is not like the old program, or, you know, they might say something like that. Then the immediate idea is, I have to go correct them. And you very well could be correct, or I could be correct in doing this. However, I would suggest maybe just listening and give them visibility to let them know that they are in fact being seen and being heard. Sometimes they don't want to hear a solution right away. Sometimes they don't want to hear a solution at all. They just want to be heard. So that's why I put offer the solutions if they ask. The other is to be authentic and positive if you in fact have a positive outlook. I hope you do if you're here today, or maybe you're trying to get some positive energy. Either way, but be authentic and maybe think about your favorite stories in Pathways. I have a few myself. One of my favorite things in Toastmasters as well as Pathways is the Toastmasters learning model, which I consider as do, learn, teach, which is a little counterintuitive, right? We often think about Toastmasters or just learning in general as, okay, you read about it, you learn how to do it, then you start doing it, and then if you're so inclined, you might teach it. But what I learned doing my high performance leadership project is, in fact, the stated learning model is do, learn, teach. Do, you sort of choose what you want to work on, get the context. Then, in fact, now that you're motivated, you start to learn. And it being such a community organization, Toastmasters, we often teach at that moment. So that's my little story. And then finally, try to relate Pathways to their interests. I've talked with many people that are starting to do blogs. Well, there happens to be a project in Pathways at level 3 about doing a blog. You might say, oh my goodness, well, that's such a coincidence, right? They're talking to you about their blog. And then you start telling them about level 3, the level 3 project related to that. Excellent. Thank you so much for all of your contribution and participation with that. But we're not done yet. The second question, have you noticed specifically emotionally member frustration about cognitively being overloaded when learning Pathways? How did or could you help solve this? So again, have you noticed member frustration about being overloaded, too many things at once, when learning Pathways? And how did you help or could you help to solve this? Again, we're going to head to the breakout rooms. We'll be brought back automatically. We're going to head off again now. And again, I want to encourage you within your groups, choose a representative if you haven't done that, and maybe a different one for this coming time. We'll see you in 3.5 minutes. Very good. Welcome back. Alrighty, so to recap, the questions that we just talked about were, have you noticed members' frustration about being overloaded when learning Pathways? And then secondarily, how did or could you help solve this? Lori, who do we see in the chat that would like to volunteer and jump in?
From my group, it was Charisse, and she took notes, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Oh, great. Charisse, let's hear from you. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. My group both had the same message, and that's meet people where they're at and don't assume. And Lori in particular just kept saying, you really have to listen to them. And what I got from both of them is changing perspective is what helps the most, and meeting people where they're at. So one example that Lori had shared is a lady had known the older system, the legacy system, and she didn't quite like the new Pathways, but she went ahead a little bit and said, how can you relate? And so she ended up keeping the track and being fine with it. And then other people like B, who are brand new, who know, not much about anything else, it was easier for us to just kind of get right in there. So that's my big take on this, is meet people where they're at and wait, like you said as well, wait till
Yeah.
you hear them and then offer solutions if they ask.
Oh my goodness, that is such great advice. Thank you, Charisse. Big hand for Charisse. And if I could just reflect what I heard a little bit, it was, first of all, we have to respect their context because they are interested in what they're interested in. And if you start adding more books to that bookshelf, the next book is just going to fall off. And if they're overloaded, the whole bookshelf is going to collapse. So great idea on that. And then secondarily, listen. There's a reason that there is, in fact, silence between participants in a conversation, because if we start filling that up more and more, they're going to just get even more and more overloaded. They're going to experience frustration. But let's put it in the positive. When you do listen and respect their context, there's all kinds of space to grow and to learn. Thank you for that. Who else would like to contribute? Lori, who else is in the chat?
No one yet, Dave, but I think it would just go to your next group.
Great. And I'm not going to put any pressure if someone's feeling maybe a little shy or not wanting to. Oh, here we go. We have somebody. Renee.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Stephanie's group, Stephanie's club, they are wisely using the mentoring program.
Ooh.
So if someone is feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, they have their mentor to help them work through. So that's really awesome right there. And then with Ellen, she has the unusual situation of having a majority of DTMs. And she had one member who was overloaded in a self-inflicted way.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of helped them parcel out their overworking themselves into a variety of the pathways they had open, and had them kind of knock off a lot of the project requirements just by giving those the pre-done work. So that was pretty clever as a solution. Really get in there on the, find out where they are and how you can help them work through that.
Yes.
In my particular case, I haven't really had a lot of frustration or overload. We have a small club and I know them all pretty well. And what I have had mostly is members who don't know how to tackle the projects. They don't understand how the level can, what they can pull out of it to complete these projects. So I do a lot of talking with them, and I'll go through their projects and talk to them about what they can match up for things they're already doing or things that would really benefit the club. I try to go that way if I can, to have them have their project work benefit the club and teaching others. So that's how we commented on how we address that.
That is great. Big hand for Renee. Thank you, Renee. If I could reflect, I mean, you gave a lot of material, but at least a couple of things that jump out at me. One is, if you do get that overachiever, almost give them permission or encouragement to just do one thing at a time. And if they're in like multiple paths, how about one path at a time? It's something that I heard. And then secondly, I think a technique, which we haven't talked about yet, which is critically important, I think, is to offer a one-on-one help. It sounds like, Renee, you do that with your members, and it sounds like they really benefit from that. So that is great. Excellent. Well, this is turning out to be everything that I had hoped. Additionally, I would like to add some information to this. This is a principle that I discovered a little while ago, and maybe you can relate to it as well. It's just, for lack of better words, called the 80-20 principle. And what this means is giving only the 20% of 20% of tasks in pathways that provides 80% of the value. And that, I think, directly relates to making sure we don't overload our folks, because there really is. I mean, for example, myself, I decided that I was very interested in not only learning pathways, but teaching it. But as a result, I studied it 365 days, 7 days a week without a day off. I mean, there's a lot of material to study, depending on how deep you want to get into it. But I think to the average member, they just want to get through their icebreaker, for example, to get started. So just let them know what they need. in my view, there's really only a couple of things that a person needs to know if they're not even inclined to do things online. For example, they need to know how to complete a project, which is their icebreaker, which is the same for every single path, every single project. Secondly, they need to know how to complete a level. Now that's provided they have a Basecamp manager that can do well in their club. So they need to know how to complete a project, a level, and then finally, if they don't want to navigate through the Basecamp user interface that often, what they can do is print out their project, and that's the third skill set. But that's really all they need, is an example of the 80-20 principle. The D7 Pathways Learning Center page, in that beginning Pathways resources section, it's really designed with this 80-20 principle in mind. There was so much more that we could have added, but the point is we didn't want to overload. And then we'd already talked about earlier the 3 Basecamp manager tasks needed, which again were pending requests. The awards, remembering they need to be processed both in Basecamp and in Club Central. And then finally, that club roster. Often Basecamp managers are like, okay, who's in my club and where are they at education-wise? That is an example of the 80-20 principle for helping a Basecamp manager. And if you are someone that wants to help a Basecamp manager or are a new Basecamp manager yourself, make sure to check out that video, that 14.5-minute video. It explains all of that. The third question is, have you noticed members being stuck or confused when trying to learn pathways? And how did or could you help solve this? In other words, maybe you've got that member that has a lot of details, has been around for a while, but then when you listen to their question, it's quite evident that there are some assumptions going on that are leading to confusion down the road. That's why I call it confusion. They have a lot of information, but there are some synapses that are not firing together. We need to get it more integrated. So if you noticed members being stuck or confused when trying to learn pathways, how did or could you help solve this? Breakout rooms for 3.5 minutes brought back automatically. Again, I want to encourage you to even choose a different representative this time, because we love hearing from our fellow Toastmasters. And let's face it, you as a fellow Toastmaster might want to express yourself with the group, but no pressure. If it's something you would like to do, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to head out now, and we will see you in 3.5 minutes. Okay, welcome back. To reiterate, the question we're going to be covering right now is, have you noticed members being stuck or confused when trying to learn pathways? Secondly, how did or could you help to solve this? Lori, who has their hand up that would like to participate?
Well, we're just going to call on people to Dr. Gwen. Oh, and fellow Toastmasters, I didn't get the opportunity to share with you. Dr. Gwen is a special guest here today. She is last year's Pathways Proponent Committee Chair and had so much to offer, and she gave so much of her time to the district. And she came today to support this endeavor. So thank you, Dr. Gwen, for joining us. And so let's give a thank you to Dr. Gwen, who started all of this. And please go ahead. Can you share what we talked about in our group?
Yes, thank you, Lori. The question was about being stuck or confused, and I had to go back to our work last year. Dave, you were on that committee as well last year, so we talked about how many people were stuck and many people that had been working in the legacy, getting them to cross the bridge into pathways. And much of that was doing the one-on-ones or the small groups and pairing people together. A strong computer person, for example, that could get pathways and knew the computer, with someone that rarely touched their computer. And having that symbiosis take place between members of the same club. That was a lot of building block. And it's the same this year, is meeting people. I believe yours is one member at a time.
Yes.
And it's just the truth, meeting people where they are and then bringing them to where they want to be. That's true mentorship, not the idea that I have. The other ideas that came, Lori was talking about having someone that is still struggling right now to understand pathways. They've tried to understand it on their own. And now she's going to take the next step and do a one-to-one with them to bring them up to speed. And that's how we
Yes.
gain people's interest, get them unstuck, help them to have a positive experience with pathways. It took 60 plus years for Toastmasters International to change educational programs. So we're not going to win everyone overnight.
Yes. Yes.
And I'd like to stop there and ask Cherise if she had something to add to the conversation, because the time ran out before we could get to her. So have the floor, Cherise.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gwen. And Therese, did you have anything to add to that?
Just a quick one. Thank you so much for letting me speak. Because I'm so new, what I have noticed, because I came in right before club contest. Now, let me tell you how many of my fellow club members were scrambling to get their speeches in so they could go and be legit. So club contests also can get people unstuck really quickly.
Okay, I love that. Thank you,
That's all
Cherise.
I have.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Thank you. Wow, I'm hearing a common thread perhaps between Cherise and Dr. Gwen of mentoring one-on-one, and secondarily, use the Toastmasters opportunities to help you get unstuck. Use the motivation, the goal structure. Excellent. And would someone else like to speak from their group?
Yes, I'll speak for my group.
Oh, excellent. Stephanie, yes, please.
Yes, so one of the techniques that was used is get the members in a speech rotation and help them out in case that they need any assistance in getting that done, if they need a little bit more time or they need a little bit more explanation, but that gets them going. So have them in a speech rotation. Also working one-on-one, which is one of the cases with this particular member in one of the clubs that was thinking all of the electives needed to be completed for level 2 and level 3 before
Yes.
moving forward. Well, that just required, let's sit down, let's see where you are,
Yes.
let's figure out how we make this work. And then the end result was now there are 2 pathways, and level 1, 2, and 3 are completed in both pathways and moving forward with level 4 on both. So that worked well. And in my club, I believe the mentorship program is what has helped. We also have the speakers on rotation. They have to sign up in advance, and as soon as they sign up for the club, we get them in a rotation already. But the mentor is going to help them prepare the speech, get everything clarified, and once the speech is delivered, then work on what's the next speech. And that's how we are doing it.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. Very much appreciate that. Wow.
Thank you.
I am also hearing the importance of one-on-one from Stephanie as well, and I could not agree more. I like the idea of the speech rotation. To me, that sort of ties in the Toastmasters learning model, which is do, like as soon as you're in it, that gives you the momentum to then learn. And then, in the mentoring program, if you do that, for example, then you would teach it. Excellent. Wonderful. Great. The thing I might add to that is just more clarification on what we talked about, which is, in my view, confusion is sort of knowing the details, but they're just not integrated yet. And I think through these ideas, through the mentoring, through the one-on-one, through the motivation, all these things we talked about, it starts to integrate our details. And then secondly, I think the solution comes back to choosing your battles and your techniques wisely. And I think the 80-20 fundamentals are a good way to do that. Maybe not try to overload them, but in fact, just give them what's needed, but not more. So to recap so far, we've talked about really these 3 Pathways Learning Center guiding principles, and now I'll be explicit with what in fact they are, which is the first one is provide motivation. Focus on the benefits and be a good listener is some of the things that we talked about. Secondly, we cure overload by reducing the amount of details. That's the second principle of the Pathways Learning Center. We provide only 20% of Pathways tasks that give 80% of the value. And then the third and final principle is to help remove confusion for members. Confusion being knowing too many details but not integrated. The solution is the consistent 80-20 fundamentals at the Pathways Learning Center. At this time, we're going to head to a brief Q&A. Our chat master is Lori Anderson. Then we're going to come back to myself for a few closing comments toward the end. I look forward to your questions. Over to Lori.
Thank you, Dave. If anyone has questions, they would either like to raise their hand, put a question in the chat box. I put one in earlier saying, thank you, Dave, for explaining your webpage to us. I do see a question by our Zoom admissions and record keeper, Elanino.
Great, love to hear from her.
It's more of a suggestion to all fellow VP of E's out there. Listen to your member about their frustration about pathways, because then somewhere in there, you're going to figure out, like I did. I had a member who had done 35 speeches since he enrolled in Pathways, 35 speeches, some of them over and over again, level 2s and level 3s, and he did pick out a few level 4 electives. And he couldn't figure out why he was stuck just completing level 1.
Ouch.
Free host, he picked the wrong path, and he wouldn't care what path he was picking. He just went to the first one where he saw the project.
Yes.
So we had him scattered all around in free host on different paths. It took several times sitting down with him on Pathways, free host, and finally cleaning it up, so to speak. So by listening to my fellow curmudgeon, because as Dave Bones and Lori and Gwen know, I love manuals. But I promote Pathways because that is the educational system. There should no longer be old manuals and pathways. There should be the educational system.
That's right.
And this is it.
Yes.
So listen to your member. He, by the way, was going to drop and he's renewing.
Hey, big hand for that. Thank you, Ellen, for your contribution and for the success story. I guess I also want to reflect a little bit on what Ellen was saying. Boy, let's look at this. I mean, this member, talk about dedication, 35 presentations, still at level 1. The person's like, I know if I just do one more, I'll get level 1. I mean, that is determination. And then with a little bit of clarity, now we can progress them forward. So I think that is great. It's both, I think, a story of persistence as well as encouragement. So thank you for that. Who else has questions? Lori, anybody else want to jump in? I mean, we can always progress and end a little bit early to give you your afternoon. Lori, do we have a participant? I think I see Dr. Gwen's hand. Is that right?
Dr. Gwen has got her hand raised.
Oh, great. Dr. Gwen, please.
Yes, this is a curious question that I think will be helpful to hear and both for us to learn from you, Dave. My question is, since you began last year as a Pathways proponent,
Yes,
and now you are that chair this year, what do you find the differential in what we had as naysayers back in the day and now the people getting unstuck or confused? How do you find that you balance that out as the lead out for people to have Pathways as a positive option?
well, thank you, Dr. Gwen. I must answer somewhat modestly. I'm still just a Pathways proponent. I just happen to be very active in the district. So I was a Pathways proponent. I'm still a Pathways proponent, just like all of us here. And Lori is our current Pathways Proponents Committee chair this year, and very grateful for her leadership. and your leadership last year. And in comparing last year to this year, like how do we help those folks that might have been stuck, if you will? I think the big factor is that we have the Pathways Learning Center this year. Myself, I can get a little obsessed about the details. Anybody here ever get like that? I might be, among friends in this regard. I used to find myself having Pathways questions, and it's like, oh, no problem. Go to toastmasters.org, click on the search bar, do this. And then someone else says, oh, there's this great district website over here. And I would be looking at all these different places, and then I would find myself experiencing all three of those things. Experiencing motivation issues, like, why am I doing all this again? Why am I not getting any sleep? Secondly, overloaded because there's so much that I'm trying to reach out and understand. And then finally, confusion, like I've got all these details, but I'm not understanding how to put it all together. The Pathways Learning Center is my best effort that I can possibly think of to cure all three of those things. So that's, I think, one way that we've been helping people either start or get unstuck. Thank you for that question. Who is next, if we have a next? And it's okay if we don't. I don't want to press anybody. Going once, twice. Oh, is that an applause, Renee, or wanting to contribute?
That was applause.
Oh, great. Well, we love that. We need the encouragement around here. Believe me, all of us. Yes.
I really applaud the PLC.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And certainly your contribution as well. And everybody here. As Lori mentioned, there is more coming up, of course. If you have questions and some of the information I would like to share with you, actually, I'd like to offer you a call to action if you're so inclined. And if you're just watching the replay, if you're an area director or division director, here's an idea that you might consider, which is we have our round 2 visits coming up for area director visits to our clubs. What you might do is offer to give a Pathways presentation, in fact, for your visit, where you maybe do 15 minutes. And then you can use the District 7 Pathways Learning Center for your curriculum and get a few questions in there, just to open that communication channel if they have questions, especially if you're looking at their numbers and their Pathways adoption might be not 100% yet. This is one way to open that communication channel and get your area director visit in. If you're a club officer or a leader in your club, consider giving a Pathways presentation and include that Q&A to make sure that we meet them where they're at, that context that so many of you talked about today. And then finally, this relates to the one-on-one, the upcoming Pathways Learning Lab on the 13th. We're going to show you that a little bit more, is called Pathways Mentor Program, Getting Started and Beyond. This will be on Wednesday, April 13th from 7 to 8 p.m. You can sign up at the District 7 calendar. I just want to thank you so much all for attending, your contribution, and I see you all as teachers, leaders in Toastmasters, and real communication is really impossible without listening. And I think this is a quote from Ralph Smedley that he shared with us that I think is very pertinent, very apropos, if you will, to what we're talking about today. I think it really has been about the communication, about the listening and the sharing. And as Dr. Gwen had talked about, I invite you to continue in our mission with the Pathways Learning Center, and I believe in D7 as well, which is helping Toastmasters members one at a time. Back to Lori for closing comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. If anybody has any ending words, comments, or questions that they would like to pose at this time, we can do that.
I would like to comment on Dave bringing up to present the PLC to your club. I did that. It went over really well. I'm going to do that again, and I just encourage other clubs to do that. It's a great idea. A lot of them don't know it exists. So.
All right. Thank you, Renee. And also, I'd like to share if there's anyone that you know of that you'd like to reach out and talk to, but don't have the time, please feel free to ask me to come to their club if you want to just ask. I mean, if they need additional training, I'm happy to do it. And just do that one-on-one that we talked about. And I think it's good training for me as well as for them, and definitely a good experience. So it is now 3 o'clock. So Dave, I think that is the time that you proposed for our meeting end time. So I will go ahead and thank you again, and we will conclude the meeting.